Hello, I'm Chris Bianchi with 9 News, and I, along with the students of Metropolitan State University of Denver, welcome you to the Solution Studio. It's a student production providing a new means for the voters of Denver to scrutinize which candidates have the solutions to back their slogans. I'd like to take the time to introduce Denver mayoral candidate Mike Johnston. Mike, thanks for taking the time to be here with us today.
Delighted to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. And let's meet our 3 MSU Denver student panelists who would like to take this time to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Naomi Hawkes. I'm a senior here at MSU Denver. I major in biology with a minor in geographic information systems, and I really enjoy doing social advocacy work for my indigenous peoples around the world, and specifically here in North America.
Hello, my name is Gabe Trujillo. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am a junior here at MSU Denver studying psychology with a minor in Spanish translations. And I am here because I want to represent the voice of the many immigrants who are in this nation.
Hello, my name is Nayeli Sanchez. I'm a senior here at MSU Denver with a major in business management and concentration in operations management. And I as well enjoy advocating for the immigrant community.
And thank you all for participating in Solution Studios here today. We'll be presenting 4 different challenge questions to Mr. Johnston, who's going to have up to 3 minutes to respond to each of those questions. And then after each of those questions, we're going to have a follow-up question round where you will have 60 seconds to answer each question. So with that said, I'll turn things over to our student panel for challenge question number 1.
Hi, thank you for being here today. So our first question is that it is estimated that in the last decade, we generated $100 billion in real estate wealth in the city and county of Denver through appreciation of property values. This wealth is often passed on to out-of-state investors, and the remaining upside was concentrated in the hands of wealth Denver rights and developers. At the same time, the majority of Denver residents who are working to keep this city running have not benefited from this wealth generation. In this same time period, Denver became the 8th most expensive city to buy a home, and yet the home ownership rate in the city is 8% behind the national average of 65%. Black and brown home ownership percentages are even lower. Please detail how you will spend the funds from Prop 123 and what other resources you will use as mayor to change who owns Denver by increasing home ownership to meet the national average. How many years will that take?
Wow, fantastic question. Thank you so much for jumping right into the hard stuff. So as you said, I want to talk about a couple parts of it. One is affordable rentals for people that need them. One is a bridge from renting to owning. And then the third is a permanent home ownership program to get people access to wealth building. And these are part of what we built in the coalition on Proposition 123. And so let me describe to you what I would do in Denver and how it changes what you described as the current inequality, which is a current system where you see a lot of units getting built. And those units are being built for folks that are not the workers in Denver who need to be able to afford to live here. And so we want to change that path. What I would do as mayor of Denver is I would build 25,000 units that would be permanently affordable. And what that means to build a permanently affordable unit is that anyone who lives or works in Denver and makes less than about $90,000 or $100,000 a year would be eligible for one of these units. And most importantly, the law requires that if you live in one of these units, you never have to pay more than 30% of whatever you make. And so if you are a first-year teacher and you make $40,000 a year as your salary, a third of that would be $12,000 a year in rent. That would be $1,000 a month. So that would mean as a first-year teacher, you could live in one of these units, and your rent never goes up from $1,000 a month. It never goes up unless your income goes up, because you never pay more unless you can pay more. You can do those with new units that we build. You can take existing units that aren't affordable, and we can convert those to become affordable. But 25,000 units is about the number of teachers, nurses, firefighters, public servants, mental health workers that are trying to serve the city right now that can't afford to live here. That's step 1. Step 2 is on home ownership. As you said, right now we want to make sure people can not only rent, but they can afford to buy. And so one of the things we'd use the dollars from Prop 123 for is to expand on a program that I helped build about 3 years ago called the Deerfield Fund, which is focused on closing the racial wealth gaps around home ownership. And we know the biggest gaps right now in home ownership for most families of color or first-time home buyers is the ability to make a down payment. If you come from a family or an ethnic or racial group that has for centuries been denied the ability to build wealth and pass on wealth to their families, it's not a surprise those families don't all have $50,000 available in the couch cushions to pay for a down payment for a home. So what this would do is provide up to $50,000 of down payment assistance. So if you go to buy the home, this would provide the down payment. You could get into that home, you keep that down payment as long as you need to, If you ever refinance your home or sell it, you'd pay it forward to the next family. You can close the wealth gaps that have existed for centuries in as short as 7 to 10 years by doing this. I would want to expand this home ownership program to first-time and first-generation home buyers across the city, which overwhelmingly overlaps most of our home buyers of color. So for me, that'd be the big focus on affordable rental units and affordable home ownership units both.
Awesome. We really appreciate that well thought out answer. My first question, a little background here. Since this is never brought up, I like to bring this to light every chance that I get. Nobody owns this land that we are on. Colonization has just made it appear that way through tyranny and genocide. Specifically, the Arapaho and Cheyenne indigenous tribes in Denver have made treaties in Denver and have never been honored. I personally believe you should focus on housing those your ancestors have displaced first and foremost. How will you first prioritize affordable housing for the displaced Arapaho and Cheyenne of the Denver area in accordance with the treaties such as the Treaty of Fort Wise established in 1861?
Thank you for raising that issue. It is a critically important one in which Denver and the state of Colorado, I think, have failed repeatedly. This is one of the reasons why when we look at home ownership, as you said, who gets to own the land that was owned previously by not any of the folks that colonized it now. This is why we really want to prioritize access for people that have systematically and historically been disenfranchised from home ownership. And that's why the focus is on first-time homeowners and on first-generation homeowners, because those are disproportionately homeowners of color, and they're disproportionately the ones who have been locked out of that cycle. When you think about, if you're a first-generation homeowner, that means your parents didn't have the capacity to buy a home themselves and pass it on to you, and that often is what happens when that discrimination has been in place for decades or for centuries. And so we think that gives us a real chance to break the cycle on families who've been denied access to home ownership and make sure they can afford to live and stay in the city that has not always been welcoming or inclusive in that way. So for me, that's a top priority, and we've made that the priority because it most overlaps the families that most get left behind in home ownership.
So things back over to our student panel here.
Great, awesome. So, I saw that you wanted to create an innovative new approach to building community wealth through the process of neighborhood investment trusts. In these neighborhoods, and residents would potentially get dividend checks for their ownership, or they would be beneficiaries for future sales. Would undocumented homeowners in these neighborhoods also qualify for the funds, and how will you ensure their access to the program?
Short answer is yes, and so I'm really glad that you asked. I've done a lot of panels and very few reporters or panelists ever ask about this program because it's kind of like the B-sides of some of our policy proposals. But the reason why it matters so much is to both the questions you raised. Right now, the model we've had in Denver so far is that you have communities that don't have a lot of development in them yet. And then you have investors that come in, buy up a bunch of the land, develop a bunch of that property. A small number of people make a great deal of money, and a lot of the folks that live there in that community get displaced. And we don't want to see that process repeat. And so what we can do here instead is set up a process where when the city owns land, as we do, we own land all over the city, we can use that land to contribute to development that we think is important, things like affordable home ownership or affordable rental units or commercial and residential. But you can do it in partnership with the community so that when those resources are built, they are owned by the community members that were there before that development got built. And now if the community's value increases, those people that built that community are the first recipients. And I think, Gabe, one of the places we'll see this most urgently is going to be Globeville area Swansea, which I think is at risk of being the next neighborhood that will be really overdeveloped by private sector developers if we don't find a way to do it in partnership to keep community members with a sense of ownership. And what we would do is the way this often would work is that anyone who lives in the neighborhood when it begins is eligible, regardless of your citizenship status. And so hope we come back to this because I also have another plan about how we support families across the metro area who are DACA recipients currently. There's a risk that the Supreme Court's going to overturn DACA, and I'm the only one to come out with, I think, a real and practicable plan to make sure we keep all those folks employed and supporting their families here in the city.
So you mentioned that your plan includes assistance for down payment for the BIPOC community specifically. How will people that hold an ITIN number or an individual taxpayer identification number, like Gabe mentioned, that's mainly for the undocumented community, how will they benefit from your program when they can't from federal programs?
Yeah, the benefit is these are not federal programs, so these are state programs and even city-run programs, and they can be developed by any number of partners. They could be a nonprofit developer, could be a for-profit developer, could be a church or a school that has land that they want to develop units on. So the idea is that these dollars aren't controlled by the city. They're available for any community group that wants to be able to build units. That can include Habitat for Humanity, it can include Elevation Land Trust. So there is an openness to any number of providers, and almost all of these providers currently serve families who might not have documentation. And so I think it's important for us to find partners that do that. Maybe while we're talking about this, I'll just share that I think the biggest risk for us right now is that there are 14,000 folks receiving DACA permits right now in the metro area who are on the job working today. And if the Supreme Court overturns that, those 14,000 people would lose access to the jobs that they already have where they're already working. That means employers lose employees, and it means families lose their source of support. And so what I would do is create a public-private partnership to keep all of those folks employed through a consulting organization, call it 5280 Consulting. And what would happen is if, say, you were working at Wine Coop as a server, and if you lost your DACA permit, you could go and work for this consulting organization, and then Wine Coop could come to the organization and say, we need 3 servers. Could you send us 3 servers? That organization can send them out as consultants. The organization gets paid, and the employees get paid on 1099s, which don't have to necessarily require social security numbers. And it could even it could be a co-op. It could be owned by the employees themselves, so any additional revenue they profit share on. But the idea is you could create a structure that the real problem here is just that the federal government can't solve immigration reform. So we have families who want to work, we have employers who want them to work. We shouldn't let federal law get in the way of that being able to continue.
Still have time for more follow-up questions here from our student panel.
Yeah, so thank you for those answers. I think there was a misunderstanding with my question. I completely understand that you are trying to prioritize BIPOC individuals in general, and I completely support that. I think that we should all work together in that sense. However, I think that we are, as Indigenous peoples, continuously put into a pool with the rest of the BIPOC individuals, and we are not given the reparations that we are so truly entitled to, honestly. And it's not like we're asking for much. We just want a home on the lands that we called home originally. And it sounds like you're putting us into these pools with everyone else. I'm not asking about the pools. I'm asking, how are you going to take us out of those pools and then prioritize us and give us the housing that we rightfully deserve? Not everyone else. I'm talking about us specifically, according to those treaties.
Yeah, fair question. I think that would be one where when we first worked on this around the Deerfield Fund, which was focused on Black and African American communities that had different but oppressive histories of discrimination and denial of access to property, we sat down with those community leaders to say, what do we think the right structure would be for how to make repair for what has been centuries of discrimination here. And that was the right tool for that community in that moment. I think I'd want to have the same conversation with Indigenous communities and say, we know there's been a lot of broken trust. What we don't want to do is set up a new organization or program that will break that trust again. So let's start from the beginning and say, what do we think needs to be done? How would it be done? What resources do we need, whether it's money or land or advocacy, and what would it look like to co-construct something that is the right design? Because I wouldn't presume to know that answer until I sat to talk with the people who would want to know much better than I would how they'd want it built.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Back over to our student panel.
Thank you for being here and for taking the time to be here with us. And so going back to the micro-community idea, I also read that hopefully that these micro-communities can hopefully then lead to permanent housing further down the road. So how will you create equitable access rather than a lottery system for communities and resources for those who deal with the intersectionality that comes with either being unhoused and being a person of color, of being LGBT, etc., and those who are trying to access these micro-communities?
Thank you. I think this is one of the reasons why I think the micro-communities as a structure is so important for those folks listening at home who don't know it as in depth as you do. The idea is one of the best ways we know to support people who are unhoused is to be able to create micro-communities. You take half-acre lots or acre lots that are vacant around the city. We can put 40 or 50 tiny homes on that site. On that site, we can provide all the wraparound services people need: mental health support, workforce training, addiction support, long-term housing counseling. And you can allow people to preserve the sense of community that existed when they were unhoused. A lot of times if you're living in an encampment with 8 or 9 people, there is a sense of real community there. And so when you open a micro-community of 40 or 50 units, you can go to those current encampments and allow those communities to move together and be rehoused into safe, dignified, stable housing where you have access to showers, you have bathrooms, you have kitchens, you have all the materials. But to your point about what kind of choice people have, I think this is why micro-communities are important, is it's not one size fits all. It's not every person goes to one massive campus. One of the reasons why you do have 10 or 20 different micro-communities is they can have different identities or different components that people are drawn to. You could have a micro-community that focuses just on families. You could have one that focuses just on people with service pets, for whom that's an important part of their lived experience. You could have one for people that were for women or women identifying. We could have had one for, as we know, the largest population of homeless youth are LGBTQ identifying. You could have a micro-community that allowed people a sense of identity in that space if they so chose it. So I think one of the purposes here is to both allow a sense of community in each of these spots and also a sense of choice that whatever is going to feel most comfortable and most supportive to you in your transition, you can find a community that matches that.
So that'll do it for challenge question number 1. Turn things back over to our student panel for challenge question number 2.
Number 2. Right. So, 70% of Denver high school graduates do not go on to earn any kind of degree, certificate, or credential of any kind, even 6 years out of high school. At the time, 90% of family-sustaining jobs require some kind of post-secondary education. The Colorado Equitable Economic Mobility Initiative reports that Colorado faces historic talent shortages across numerous sectors brimming with good-paying jobs, from IT to healthcare to manufacturing to the skilled trades. Details the specific strategies that you will use to supplement the programs of Denver Public Schools to ensure that more young people are able to enter the workforce debt-free and secure a starting position that offers a livable wage and a pathway to the economic security of homeownership.
Thank you for this great question. Obviously, for me, I'm a little biased. I am proud to be a member of the Board of Trustees of Metro State, and so I do think one of the best opportunities for access for young people in this city is to come to institutions like Metro, where you can be able to get access to an affordable degree that's going to get you placed into a middle-class job and change the trajectory of your life. So we want to continue to be a better partner as the mayor of Denver with the Auraria campus and how we can make this a real hub of opportunity and a vibrant part of the community where kids can not only learn, but can live and work and have access to the rest of the city. And so I think that part of the history of this land being taken and overtaken is we want to make sure this campus that educates the most diverse kids in the state of Colorado from Colorado should also have the resources they need to provide those services. So that's part 1. But part 2 is, I think what we do need to do is create an ongoing way for people to be trained and retrained for the jobs that are emerging at any stage over the course of their life. That's true when we're 18. But it's going to be more and more true for people when you're 28 or 38 or 48 and your job disappears and you got to find the next job. And you want to be able to do it without taking on a bunch of debt with no guarantee you're going to get a job. And so partnered with CME, the organization that you referenced that did that study, to work on the idea for a training organization that would be called Better Offer. It's a better offer for people that are looking for jobs, which is we'd partner with a bunch of organizations, nonprofit or higher ed, that provide training for jobs that we know have openings. And the idea is those students or young people or people of any age entering that training would not have to pay upfront the cost of that tuition. You get the training first. And after the training's done, we're going to try to get you placed into a job that pays at least $40,000 a year or more. If you don't get placed into a job that does that, you owe nothing for the training because it means we weren't successful in getting you trained for a job that would pay you a family wage. It's only if you do get placed into that job that pays you a family wage that then the employer would cover some of the cost, the city or philanthropy would cover some of the cost, and the student would cover some smaller part of the cost. But the idea is you erase that risk of young people not wanting to get training because they're afraid of getting debt and no degree and no job. And you get employers to be involved to say, if you really want wonderful young talent, you should pay for it. And if we're going to be able to, and then it allows providers that can really prepare people with skills to have ways for them to be financed to provide those skills so that someone is coming into training, getting a job, getting into the middle class, and making opportunities for people that come next. And so for me, that's how I would approach creating a lifelong learning opportunity for people who want to get trained for jobs that will give them a family wage.
Send things over to our student panel for follow-up questions.
Awesome. All right, so I'm gonna start with a little background here. So I think the problem here is that what we consider livable, the typical 9 to 5, pays the bills, has benefits, saves some money here and there, if nothing out of the ordinary happens, which is very unlikely, and gives you the typical 2-week vacation out of the year. Now, I don't know about most folks, but that's not living, that's surviving by complacency. So how can you advocate/fund to expose our youth to the many opportunities outside of the 9 to 5 job that inspires them to pursue what it takes to live that lifestyle, not just what our society wants them to do based off of $40,000 a year, because that's not realistically livable.
So I think there are a couple of really powerful points you made. One is about how do we make sure we're getting people into wages that are actually livable. This is why I think things like increasing the minimum wage were critically important, like giving people access to affordable housing is critically important, because those drop down your costs to make your life more livable. I think part of what you're saying in addition to that is, how do you give people the chance to create and build things that inspire them, that are more than can you find a place to punch a clock? And so I think part of this is also about changing real histories of discrimination and inability to get access to small business ownership, which is right now, both women and people of color who are trying to start businesses are the least funded and the least supported of any enterprise in the country. And I would say Denver as a city is complicit in that problem. We do the same thing. We make it very hard for entrepreneurs of color and entrepreneurs who are women to get access to funding, and then they fail for lack of resources. Someone like Fatima Dickerson, who is the owner of Welton Street Cafe, if you've ever eaten there, but it is the oldest black-owned business in the city and county of Denver, and she's been waiting for 18 months for a bridge grant from Denver that still hasn't come. What I would do to be direct is to say, we should reverse the thinking about what the city does. Often the city says, oh, go to a bank for funding, or go to an investor for funding. We know groups that are historically marginalized are going to get rejected from those institutions already. The city should be able to undo that and say, we should actually be the ones leading the charge to say, here are entrepreneurs in our city that represent the full diversity of the city, and we're going to take bets on them. We're going to take risks. We're going to put money in first, and we're going to put money in fastest. Then we're going to go to the banks and the other investors and say, you know what, you should come with us, because these people are worth betting on. And you know what, if 5 of the 10 don't succeed, that's okay, we expect that. That happens to entrepreneurs. I'd much rather have the city commit money early and often to entrepreneurs who are trying to build something they love in a city they love than to sit on their hands and hide behind a stack of hundreds of papers that people have to apply for to ever get a chance to build their dream.
Beautiful, thank you.
Yeah.
Back over to the panel.
Thank you. So, as we know, technology is growing. It is all over the world, found in all different spaces, and one of those is schools. So, how are you going to assist and provide resources to families who cannot keep up with their students' technological school needs as your educational journey progresses?
This was one that was heartbreakingly clear to us during the pandemic, which when we said, okay, we're going to close schools, but don't worry, we'll do remote school. And what we learned that first spring of 2020 is at that point, 50% of the Latinx families in Colorado did not have access either to a wireless device or to wireless in their own home, which meant the idea of learning at home was going to be no learning at all for half of our largest minority group in the state. And that revealed real inequalities we have to fix. That means that shouldn't just be true in the moment of a pandemic. It's going to be true every year, all the time, for young people who need access to all of the world that's opened through the internet. So I think what we have to do is be much more aggressive about making sure that those opportunities are equally available, whether that is wireless access that we could subsidize for all families, whether it's more free wireless locations around the city, whether it's devices, whether they be phone or iPads or tablets that the city or the school districts can help provide together. I also think it's really important why we make sure that young people have access to all of the after-school opportunities that help you find your passion. Right now, we know if you want to go to a science camp at the Denver Science Museum, or you want to join a traveling robotics team, or you want to be on a competitive girls basketball team, that all requires money. And if your parents can't pay for that, you're going to lose access to the things that might inspire you at age 12 to say, this is what I want to spend my life doing. And so we helped launch a program with Denver Public Schools to start a pilot to provide kids on free and reduced lunch access to the programs they choose, whatever they choose their passion to be, whether it's tutoring or math or science or art or athletics. And I'd like to expand that across the city so that all kids and families could be able to say, what are the things I dream for my young person to be able to do? And how do I make sure that they can explore those things when they're 10 and 12 and 14, so by the time they're 18 or 20, they know what drives them.
Thank you.
Time for more follow-ups?
Yes, that all sounds great. I think you've mentioned in the past doing these after-school activity programs. How would this affect once they reach that age of 14 when they're in these low-income families and they're not able to keep doing them because they now have to find a job and help support these families? How would they benefit, or what programs would come into mind for them once they get to this age?
Great point. And you're thinking specifically about when folks are starting to enter the workforce. Is that what you mean? Yeah. I think the hope is these programs could be available to kids at all ages, all the way up through 18. It doesn't change, to your point, if you're 16 and you have to work to support your family and you can't do that anymore. That is a reality. But I do think if there are kids or families who still want to find time for science camps in the summer and can do that around their jobs, they would still be eligible up until age 18. But I think what you raise is if there is a family obligation that you have to support your own family, I think what we ought to do then is help people get access to those jobs that they're in career fields they're interested in that also are paid. We want to end the world of unpaid internships, which are really a vestige of privilege for people that can afford to subsidize themselves, and instead say we want more and more work opportunities that the city should help navigate and create for young people that are paid and that are hopefully aligning to a career you're interested in. So now you as a 16-year-old don't have to say, gosh, I wish I could be advancing my career interest this summer, but instead I have to get a job to pay some bills. Now you could both pay some bills and hopefully be doing it in an area of interest, like journalism or like small business or like health or whatever that might be. And so I think the city should help create those options for young people.
Back over. Oh, actually, I'm sorry about that. I think that will do it for challenge question number 2. So send things on over to our student panel for challenge question number 3.
So Denverites have gone to the street numerous times in recent years to protest exceptional uses of force, from George Floyd to Elijah McClain to Lodo shooting. And sadly, a smaller event is likely to happen again during your time as mayor. If it does, will you have a range of options for your response? And how will it differ from the past administration? And what will be your priorities for engaging with the community, and as well as engaging with the police, the sheriff, or the district attorney?
So I think the first is I have an obligation first as mayor to make sure we build a police force and a public safety force that represents the community, serves the community, and protects the community. That's the idea. That means I want a police force that is both recruited from the communities that they're serving, that looks much more diverse, particularly by gender as well as by race. Right now, almost 90% of the officer force is men still. We want to be able to change that dynamic. We also want to train them differently, so they're actually trained in the strategies of how to de-escalate conflict instead of how to escalate conflict. I was a teacher and a principal, and as a teacher, you get used to when a kid is very heated and yelling at you, you have to learn how to de-escalate that student, not how to get them more escalated, and officers' training is often the reverse. Then the third is to build a different kind of relationship where we have back real community-based policing, which means you actually have officers that are in neighborhoods, walking blocks, talking to neighbors, giving their business cards, in relationship with residents, so that there is an actual relationship there that is about protecting and not about policing. I think those are two very different feelings and very different truths. So that would be the first step for me. The second one you mentioned is what happens in the event that there is a crisis or a catastrophe or an injustice. For me, the first step is always to sit down and listen, and to sit down and listen to the communities that are most affected, because I think that is your first job as the mayor. And so if there are people protesting in the streets, I would be the first one out there to sit and listen to them and have them tell me what their concerns are, what their demands are, what their frustrations are, what they think we're not doing well enough. I always find I can get much more done by listening than by fighting. And I respect people's right to be upset when there's real injustice in the streets. My goal is that that's not going to happen under our administration, but when it does, I've made mistakes before, I'll make them again. I think the first thing you have to do is take accountability for them, listen to what you've done wrong, and then figure out how to fix them to make sure they don't happen again. That's where I would begin. But my hope is that if we do the right kind of recruiting, the right kind of training, and the right kind of deploying, you get very different results. Including, by the way, I've said this is about putting more mental health workers on the street and putting more paramedics and EMTs on the street, so you have the right first responder responding to the right type of incident. If you have someone in a mental health crisis, the last person you want to send is an officer. It's actually probably the worst person to send to that scenario. What you want is a mental health worker or someone that can understand that situation, de-escalate, and get them access to services. So I think it is about seeing this as a whole bag of tools that we use differently in different parts of the city. And in a lot of these crises that are mental health or physical health related, those should not be officers going. Those should be mental health workers or paramedics or EMTs.
Over to our student panel for follow-up questions.
Awesome answer. Really appreciate that. That was very thoughtful. So something I feel like that isn't talked about enough, especially in any state, but especially Colorado, is the missing, murdered, and indigenous women movement. And that happens more often than not on reservations that are being exploited for their minerals. And also sex trafficking just in general, especially of children, until it's too late. And even then, it barely makes the news. As of recently, somebody who was in charge, Gerard Ackerman, was the kingpin of a ginormous child sex trafficking ring and convicted of 700 plus charges. And I feel like in the majority of your campaign, you haven't mentioned anything that had to do with sex trafficking. And I feel like that is a big problem everywhere, not just in Denver. So I want to know, have you educated yourself on this, and how are you going to bring awareness and solutions to these issues, specifically MMIW?
Thank you. So two things, one on sex trafficking and the other on the MMIW question that you raised. I think on sex trafficking, this is and does continue to be a real crisis in the city and around the state. My wife is a district attorney, and she spent a lot of her career prosecuting sex trafficking. And so I know this issue fairly well from some of her work. I also used to run a school that had a number of young people who had themselves been trafficked and were trying to get their lives back together after that. And so have had both personal and firsthand experience supporting people who've lived through that and seeing the reality of how pernicious these rings are, and the fact that they still exist right underneath our noses, often in the middle of residential neighborhoods where people don't know what's happening. So I think this is a place where we want to make sure we have better alignment between our law enforcement and our district attorneys and our courts, and with the federal prosecution as well, with the U.S. Attorney and others we could partner with. And then, so I think that is something that we can and should provide more focus on, and I would partner with the DA's office and the U.S. Attorney's office to make sure we're prosecuting those and following through on them. On MMIW, I think this is one where the city can be much more active in saying, what is our obligation to both investigate those cases that exist connected to our own city or our own history, and or to provide resources or partnership to places where those investigations are underfunded or under-resourced. We still have the largest law enforcement operations in the state here in Denver, and Denver leads the state on many things. It also should be able to lead the state on rectifying some of the deepest injustices that we were certainly a part of on the front end. And if we can help be allies with resources or training or support or investigation, I think we ought to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Over to our student panel.
Thank you. So going back to your answer to the challenge question, I heard that you want to put more clinical and mental health professionals and EMT so they're easier to access for the community and therefore bettering the community. What is your step-by-step plan to help recruit for these positions?
This is one of the toughest questions, I think, and it's not just true for mental health workers or for EMTs, it's true for people in the planning and zoning department, and there are departments across the city and county of Denver that are understaffed and people are overworked, and that drags down morale, and that makes it a big challenge. I think it links some to your early question about how do we make sure people have access to jobs that are sustainable family wage jobs. We do have some really good family wage jobs in the city that we have to recruit more people to come to. So for me, part of it is the same way that MSU does recruiting. It is we have to make the public case to all the residents of the city and county of Denver that we need you. We need your help. Your city needs you. And these are noble and important jobs. And we want to recruit you to come into this profession, feel a sense of calling that you're going to improve your neighborhoods and your communities and the lives of your families. And it's really like the Marines or the Army does in their recruiting, which is this is a call to service. We think this is a real call to service all across the city and county of Denver. I would do that in the first place. The second one is, right now we have a very slow and cumbersome process for recruiting for employees, particularly into fire departments, police departments, because we have a civil service commission that can be up to a 7-month wait for you to be able to, when you apply for a job, be noticed if you're actually available to apply to enter an academy. And a lot of the neighboring jurisdictions, that only takes 60 days. And what I hear overwhelmingly is the candidates we lose most often, the most sought after candidates in that recruitment pool by us being so slow, are our women candidates and our people of color. Those are people that are the most sought after for other positions. If Jefferson County says, we'll offer you a job today, and Denver says, just wait 5 more months and we'll let you know if maybe you have an option, we lose too many good candidates that way. So it's a matter of both recruiting from all the neighborhoods where we're going to serve, inspiring people to want to be a part of it, and making our process go much faster so we're not making great candidates wait.
Time for another follow-up question.
So recently, Governor Jared Polis has moved to give, or wanting to give DACA recipients the opportunity to become public service jobs, specifically for police officers. How can you implement a system that will give DACA recipients the advantage on filling these jobs, like you mentioned?
I love this idea, and I think this is one of the things that is great about being mayor, is the mayor is a very strong executive position where you have the chance to both write the budget and lead on the design of some of the policy with city council. And we have, I think, a very progressive city council who wants to take on some of these problems. So I think this is one of those great disconnects. When I looked at what we called the migrant crisis over the last several months, the only crisis was we had thousands of people here who deeply wanted to work. And we had a federal government who said they couldn't work, despite the fact that we had employers who deeply wanted to hire them, right? The only crisis is the federal government's in the way of people who want to work getting hired on jobs that want them to work there. The same is true for sure for our DACA recipients. These are people who already have served their country, have already gotten an education, who already want to be a part of the solution. I think it'd be a great plan for us to look at how we can put them into city-based jobs, particularly in places where we have a lot of openings. And so that's a place where I'm willing to be courageous and a little bit creative to say, let's start doing that and show that they can be a successful strategy. Because if we want to have places where those workers can stay employed, we know we have a lot of openings at the city, and that should be a great chance to connect people who want jobs with jobs that we need filled.
I think we have time for another follow-up question.
Awesome. So my question is, how do you justify that police in Denver are qualified enough to hold authority in upholding the law after only 26 weeks of training in police academy, but a lawyer is only qualified in justifying the law after 12 years of schooling?
Yeah, I think there is a balance for a law enforcement. This is the trade-off of how long does the training need to be so you make sure you get really qualified and well-prepared candidates, and how do you do it so it's not too long that you lose great candidates throughout the process. I think there is part of the training that is what you get in high school and middle school, and that there is that how do you become a person that we think is a person of integrity, and who is a person who has community relationships and community commitment that is going to be transparent to the people that you work with. And it's about accountability. We also have to be able to say, if you prove to us either during the training or once you're on the job that you're not fit for the job, then we have a very high expectation that we need to remove you from that job. With our Air Force pilots or our United Airlines pilots, you don't say, 70% of them are pretty good. The other 30%, if you're on that plane, sorry, bad luck for you, right? We have to have a similarly high expectation for those people that are entrusted with the most power and the most responsibility for the city, do have the highest expectations for their behavior. And I think that's what we should insist on, but it also means we should recruit for that. And I think this includes the way we recruit people for this job, which is if you see this as really a chance to serve your community and be a leader in your community and be a protector of your community, I think that's a different job than people might have felt called to 5 or 10 years ago, where it was more traditionally someone who had served a couple tours in the military and wanted to come back and do another tour in a military-like unit in their own city. That's not really what we need right now. What you need is a combination of people who can, yes, keep you safe, but can also build relationships and bind people back together.
That'll do it for our third and second to last challenge question. Now time for our fourth and final challenge question here. I'll turn things back over to our student panel.
All right, so a few facts on homelessness in Denver. According to Metro Denver Homeless Initiative, 87% of the homeless in Denver are Denver residents, our neighbors, and your constituents. The Denver Social Impact Bond has shown it costs half as much to house someone as it does leaving them to cycle in and out of emergency services. Last June, the Denver Right reported that there are 21,000 unoccupied apartments in Greater Denver. Imagine you are in the conversation with a homeless resident. Please explain how you will work to make vacant apartments to low income and people experiencing housing. What specific items in your first budget will assist that person to move off the street and into housing?
This is the most important issue in the city to me, and it is the reason why I ran for mayor, and it's the thing that I'm most committed to addressing on day one, which is exactly the truth you just described, which is we have a dramatic number of people who are currently homeless, and the truth is they are homeless because they are living in a city where the cost of living is getting higher and higher and higher, and we are leaving them behind. There is this myth that, people from around the country are coming to Denver to be homeless because it's so wonderful to be homeless here, as if someone's in West Virginia sitting with their friends saying, what's the best day to be homeless in? Let's buy a plane ticket to Denver. That's not how it happens. People from our own community that we can't serve well drop out of the housing cycle, and we have to be able to support them. And you mentioned, there are a lot of opportunities, both with vacant commercial buildings, some of which we can retrofit to be residential, some with vacant residential buildings. But what we want to do is be able to get people quickly into housing. So this is why the first transition step are these micro communities where you can put people into tiny homes or into safe outdoor spaces where you can get housing immediately. You got heat, you have access to all of the utilities that you need, and you have support that are there on site. That's step one. But then we have to move very quickly to build and to convert units that are going to be affordable. That can be taking hotels that we can convert to be affordable. It can be old apartment buildings. Or I would look at if there are units that are vacant and we're willing to acquire those from whoever owns them to make them into housing for people that can't afford housing right now. I would do all of the above. This requires an all of the above strategy, and all of the above strategy to do as quickly and urgently as possible. So we'll put close to $250 million against this problem in year one. And I've said that I will appoint a senior advisor to my cabinet who only oversees all of the work around homelessness, because what we know is it requires such complicated alignment of so many departments. It's not just, oh, you're homeless. It's how are we connecting the planning and zoning for those units to the mental health support, to the addiction treatment, to what law enforcement is doing or not doing. And if you don't align all of those, then you get the real holes in the fabric that people fall through, and I think that's what we have right now. So this is top priority for me on day one, to put the resources and the plans into action to get that done.
Send things over to our student panel for follow-up questions.
Perfect, thank you. So, as you mentioned, a lot of the people who are homeless are from our own Denver community. So what solutions and resources will you put in place to keep tenants from losing their homes and keeping a roof over their heads, even with the rising rents, the continued pressure of inflation, and the scarcity of available resources?
I've had the good fortune of having been working on this problem for a number of years. So both the social impact bond that you referenced was one that the organization I used to work for, Gary, helped fund. And now in the last 3 years, when I was there, we helped fund an organization called the Eviction Defense Project, which was designed to do exactly what you just said, Gabe, which is how do you keep people who are at risk of being evicted from becoming homeless? And what we found is it's a terrible use of everyone's money. If you have someone that is $500 late on their rent, to evict that person means they're now going to be homeless. But even the landlord who evicted them is probably not going to get that $500 back that they owe, and they're going to have an open unit for 1 or 2 months, so they're going to lose money also. So what we did is support an organization founded by a couple of local entrepreneurs that raises money to say, we'll have a fund that pays that person's $500 that they owe. And they keep you in your unit, could even help you pay your next month or 2 rent. So now the landlord's happy because you've stayed and you've paid your rent. You are not evicted or homeless. And then you can have that as a very, very low interest loan you can pay back when you get back on your feet, when you get the job back or you get money back. It's not a predatory lender. It's not someone that's going to hold it over your head. It's a nonprofit that will say, we can wait a year if you need a year to pay it back. But this also saves dramatic amounts of money because you're not providing the resources to support someone who's unhoused. You're not having landlords lose the money from an open unit. And you're not dealing with all the social services that come with people being homeless again. So I think we can do much more on the front end to prevent homelessness by preventing eviction.
I think we have time for one more follow-up here.
So you've mentioned a couple times wanting to keep these communities together, so moving them along, but keeping them as kind of somewhat of a family. And really, I think, how long after creating this community and everything else, going through the work process, everything like that, how long after will they be able to go back out, not just into this community, but the rest of the community?
Yeah, you all ask all the exact right follow-up questions. Our lessons learned so far on that is it's usually about 6 to 9 months is the transition. The goal, and it can vary person to person based on what your needs are, but often you're getting housed into a micro-community. You're getting the lowest level of Maslow's triangle hierarchy of needs taken care of. You have shelter, you have food, you have a place you can store and protect your stuff. Then if you have mental health needs, you might be getting some treatment for that, maybe some medication if it's necessary. If you have addiction needs, you're getting support for that, getting stabilized. Then you're applying for jobs, you're getting some training and preparation on how to either apply, how to put together a resume, how to interview, and how to make it through your first few weeks on the job successfully. And then once you've saved up some money from those first couple of paychecks, now you're starting to look for permanent housing where you have the money to be able to make that first month rent payment. And so that's normally the progression is about 6 to 9 months. But it's not a hard stop. If you're not done in 6 months, we kick you back out because the idea is we don't want to make people homeless again. But people are usually eager to get back out into the main community. I think our biggest challenge there is there aren't enough affordable units out there for them to move to. So this is where our homelessness challenge connects to our affordable housing challenge. If they're ready to move, we got to make sure we actually have units for them to move into, and we don't have enough of those right now.
Some thoughtful discussion, and that'll do it for challenge question number 4. And you're officially off the hot seat there, Mr. Johnston. So it looks like we're out of time. Would love to thank our student panel for being here, and of course, Mr. Johnston for being here as well. So
incredibly impressive. Thank you all so much for your really great work.
Yeah, so that'll do it for today. And yes, thanks again to everybody for being here.
I'd like to thank the candidates, 9 News, and our audience for watching the Denver Mayoral Solution Studio. Metropolitan State University of Denver is recognized nationally as a leader in student voting. In 2016, MSU Denver won the All-In Democracy Challenge. In 2021, it was placed on the Washington Monthly's honor roll for America's Best Colleges for student voting. In 2022, our campus was chosen to create the first candidate solution studio in the nation as we represent the next generation of Colorado and America's workforce, changemakers, public servants, and leaders. We hope watching this Denver Mayoral Solution Studio gave you more insight into which candidate has what it takes to solve our city's intractable and complicated problems. Thank you.
The Solution Studio is a project of the MSU Denver Institute for Public Service in partnership with 9 News Plus, which is a free 24/7 streaming app where you can watch all your favorite 9 News programming, as well as live breaking news, updated weather forecasts, original shows, and much more. In addition to MSU Denver, 9 News has been joined by the following partners in producing the Solution Studio: the League of Women Voters of Denver, a nonpartisan, grassroots, and multi-issue organization that is a recognized force in our community. As a nonpartisan organization, it encourages informed and active participation in government, and it influences public policy through education and advocacy. The League is proud to be a partner in producing the Solution Studio to better inform Denver voters. Claro, the Colorado Latino Leadership, Advocacy and Research Organization's mission is to empower Latinos through leadership development, advocacy, and policy research to strengthen Colorado. Helping provide candidates this forum to discuss solutions to Denver's problems fits with Claro's mission. New Voice Strategies creates, incubates, and launches projects to heal divides, restore compassion, and strengthen self-government. The Solution Studio format is a creation of New Voice Strategies. I'm Chris Bianchi. Thanks for watching, and remember to vote.